to go. All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry for starting a little bit late tonight, but it allowed a few more people to get in without missing the all-important first few minutes of the talk. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Bill Laboon. I am the technical education lead for the Web3 Foundation. And tonight we're going to be talking about autonomous blockchain governance. That is, how can we use blockchain to institute governance and even to govern itself. And we'll be talking specifically about how Polkadot does it. So Polkadot is basically a network of blockchains and a way of connecting different blockchains to talk to each other. We'll discuss it very briefly. You can see I've got my Polkadot shirt on. Unfortunately, I did not bring any swag. Normally I have Polkadot swag. I just didn't get a chance to go back home and get it. So I apologize. I don't have any on me. But I'm around Code and Supply all the time. So if you want something, a shirt or whatever, just ask me. I have a bunch in the basement. I'm happy to bring some in if you can meet me here. So if you have any questions or want to talk with me later and you don't have a chance, I've got my contact information there, Bill, B-I-L-L, at web3.foundation, or you can follow me on Twitter, at Bill Laboon. All right, so first off, I do want to advertise a little bit about what we at the Web3 Foundation are doing. So the Web3 Summit, which is a celebration of all things Web3, that is bringing the blockchain and cryptography and to the web, to the internet, and decentralizing it, is coming a Funkhaus Berlin. I don't think many of you will go there on such short notice, but you never know. However, all of our talks will be streamed. So it's August 19th through 21st. I'll be there giving actually this workshop as well as another workshop. But it has all sorts of different blockchains involved and different communities. It is not just for Polkadot. So if you're interested, I'm happy to give you specific links about specific talks or whatever. Or if you go to web3summit.com, you can see what we're doing there. Also, I wanted to let people know that the Web3 Foundation is hiring, either in Berlin, Zug, which is in Switzerland, just south of Zurich, or remote. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, or what we talk about tonight sounds really interesting to you, and you're looking for a job, please feel free to let me know, or go to web3bamboohr.com/jobs. We're especially interested if you're a researcher, if you've ever done specifications, requirements analysis, if you're interested in security. But we also have other roles like community management and others available. So again, I'm happy to talk more about that. And if you are interested, just as a bit of an enticement, this is the view from right outside the office in Zug. I honestly don't know what it looks like in Berlin. I'll be going there for the first time this August. I've only been to the Switzerland office. But we are looking for people, so if you are interested, please let me know. All right, so before we actually start going through what we'll discuss tonight, I just want to show you a sort of roadmap of the evening. I'm going to give a very brief introduction to Polkadot and what it is and why governance is so important. We'll talk about what governance is. What do I mean when I say governance? And specifically, how does we apply that to blockchain? What does it mean to have governance in blockchain? What is the difference between traditional governance, probably what you think of when you think of governance, a president and a senate or a prime minister and all that, versus autonomous governance? And then some of the problems that other blockchains have seen in the past with governance. So we'll specifically talk about two of probably the biggest issues that we have seen in blockchain history in terms of governance. The Bitcoin Cash split, and the DAO and the birth of Ethereum Classic. And then we'll talk about what we at the Web3 Foundation have learned from that when we are developing our own set of blockchain technologies. And we'll then have our workshop on how exactly to do governance with Polkadot. So we'll talk about the basics. It is a democratic system. It's on-chain autonomous governance. We'll talk about proposals and referenda, what the council is, and some of the interesting modifications to traditional democracy that we have, like adaptive quorum biasing and time locking of votes. All right. So first off, I want to, again, just very briefly talk about what Polkadot is. Those of you that have been to some of the previous talks here, this will be old hat for you, since I did go much more into depth on my talk about on building a blockchain with Substrate, and the talk on being a validator in Polkadot. Both of those talks are available, so if you want to go back and look at them, I'm happy to give you a link to the videos or send you the slides. So Polkadot is a heterogeneous multi-chain technology. And I do have a link there. I apologize, I didn't realize on this screen, it's kind of hard to read the purple writing. But Polkadot.network, there is a lot of information there. We have the Polkadot Wiki, which is our sort of description for people that are interested in developing on Polkadot. We have our research pages. We have a lot of things. So if you're interested in reading papers and understanding the proofs and why we do things the way we do, you can look at the research papers on there as well. So what do we mean by this? Well, Polkadot was basically invented because Gavin Wood, who is the founder of the Web3, one of the founders of the Web3 Foundation, realized that every blockchain has trade-offs. If you look at Bitcoin, there are certain things it has, such as an incredible security system, a lot of hash power behind it. It's very solid, but it also has some drawbacks. It's very difficult to write smart contracts on Bitcoin. It has a relatively slow block production time. It has limitations in its scripting language. So there are definitely some drawbacks to that. And depending on what you want to do, you may want to use different blockchains. And so you may have heard the term Bitcoin maximalist or Ethereum maximalist, somebody who thinks a particular blockchain is the be-all, end-all of blockchains. Everyone should use this one. Polkadot is kind of a bet against that. It's the idea that lots of people are going to want to use different blockchains, be able to make their own, and use the one that works best for them, but still have them all talk and interact with each other. So again, I had a previous talk on this, on using Substrate to build your own blockchain, which allows you to create a Polkadot compatible blockchain really without modifying any code, just modifying some specs and some JSON. So if you're interested in that, again, this, as background, I do have a talk on that, and I'm happy to send you more information on that if you like. So this is a very basic description of or diagram of what Polkadot is like. So there is a core chain called the relay chain where other chains can interact with using validators. And again, so these validators basically prove that what the parachain is doing is in fact valid. Parachains are chains that run in parallel, that share security but may have different settings and parameters, but can all communicate directly through the relay chain to other parallel chains, parachains. We also can provide bridges to other already existing blockchains. We're looking at, for the initial release later this year of the mainnet, Zcash, Ethereum, and Bitcoin, but there's no reason why others couldn't be added in as well. So just as sort of a side note, the mainnet is being released most likely later this year, Q4 2019. However, we are releasing what we're calling a canary network, basically an unaudited early version called Kusama, in the very near future. So the exact date isn't set, but we're talking by the end of the summer, by the end of August. Kusama, which is basically, it's not exactly a test network since there is actual economic value behind it, but sort of an early release of this is coming very, very soon, and the mainnet release will be later this year. So we have this idea that the world, right, the Polkadot can be the internet of the decentralized web. That we have our relay chain, that's what we represent in the middle, all sorts of different parachains, which is the sort of purple outside, as well as external chains. You can see us connecting sort of out into all these other chains that already exist. So the idea here is that all sorts of different kinds of of blockchains can interact with each other. People can choose which one works best for them, talk with others, easily move data from one to another, etc. However, if we're going to have something like this, right? If we want to have some, this is a very ambitious vision. I hope everyone, looking at that, thinks like, wow, that and making a new internet, basically. That seems like a very, very big thing to do, and a lot of things can go wrong. And one thing that we have really thought about very long and hard is, how do we govern that? How do we decide which blockchains should become a part of this? How do we decide what the parameters of the network should be? Who should be considered what we call a validator? So think of that as basically an equivalent of a miner. How do we allow people to express their opinions on the direction of the network, right? And we do that through governance. So governance, the definition, I sort of chopped this down from the dictionary definition, which I realize is kind of a cliche, right? The dictionary defines governance. I feel like I'm giving a valedictorian speech or something. The rules by which a society operates, including how those rules are changed. And I think this is the important part, right? If you think back even in, I apologize, I'm not as familiar with other countries, but you look back in American history, how rules are actually made has changed, right? Via amendments to the Constitution and other ways, right? We added direct election of senators. We added, we gave women the right to vote. The filibuster originated in the Senate. If you read the Constitution, you won't see anything about the filibuster. So not only have we changed rules, right? We have changed the laws. We have also been able to change how those laws are created. Right? So I think it's sort of this recursive aspect that really constitutes governance. Not just making laws, but also how do we make laws and how do we change how we make laws. Right? So it turns out there is no perfect governance mechanism. There is no way where we can say that there is a perfect way for everybody to get what they want, or that the will of the majority will always take place. And this isn't a political science class, but if you're interested, I have a sort of reference to this, Arrow's Impossibility Theorem by Kenneth J. Arrow. He wrote this in the 50s, where he basically proved that if you want to have a sort of a voting system that allows multiple choices, that allows multiple people to vote, that will always occur the same way every time you do it, and provide some sort of rational ordering. That is, that A would prefer, a group would prefer option A over B and B over C. It turns out this is impossible to do in all cases. So creating a perfect governance structure that absolutely encompasses the views of the people involved, turns out the only way that this is possible if there's only one person involved. So a dictatorship would be a solution to governance. That Bill Laboon, he is the only voter. He is thus going to say exactly how the blockchain will work, and then there would be no problems, right? I mean, people may not like it, but from a governance perspective, there would be no mathematical problems. So what this tells us is that if we don't want to have a dictatorship, and I certainly don't want to have a dictatorship, that's not why I signed on to the blockchain space, we're going to have some trade-offs. We're not going to have a perfect system, but hopefully we can have a good system. Right? So what will we use this governance for on a blockchain? I've already mentioned some of the aspects, but just to have an official list here, well, what constitutes a valid block? If I say that here is a new block for the blockchain, right? We have rules for that. In Bitcoin, right? You're looking for a lower hash. In proof of stake systems, you're proving that you are the validator or block producer that is next up. Etc. There's, a valid block has certain rules associated with it. That's part of governance. What algorithms do you use? Right? So Bitcoin uses SHA-256. That is in a sense a governance. People have agreed that SHA-256 is the hash function we're going to use for this. How do we upgrade? on chain? What if we find a bug and we need to modify the code? How do we determine how that's done? Right? That's governance. How do we determine consensus? That is, what is the canonical block ordering? Right? How do we determine, if we want to even, which coins have been tainted or stolen? Right? How do we discourage bad actors? Via blackballing them or whitelisting. What is a bad actor? We'll see. When we talk about the Ethereum Classic split, defining what a bad actor is can be very difficult. What kind of interactions do we allow with external systems? Okay. So all of these are aspects of governance, things that we as a community running a blockchain have to decide. So when I first started talking with people about this, someone said, well, this seems kind of ridiculous, right? Isn't that the point of a program? That it's all written in the code. I don't have to figure out, oh, right, we need to use SHA-256 hashes because the program does. That's what it does, right? I can look at the Bitcoin source code or whatever the source code is and see, what is allowed, what is valid, what is not. That's not governance. That's not politics. That's just the code, and the code is the truth, right? I can look at the code and say, all right, this is what we're going to do. But I like this quote from the philosopher Richard Rorty: "Truth is what your contemporaries let you get away with." Right? So we may say that's the truth, but who decides that this is the particular code to run? So even if you look at Bitcoin, which is relatively concentrated, there's a Bitcoin core implementation that the vast majority of Bitcoin nodes use. But there are other nodes out there. There are other node implementations with other blockchains like Bitcoin Cash. There are quite a few other ones. So if there's a disagreement between these, how do we decide which is if one has a bug or just a different interpretation of the requirements? How do we decide which is the correct one? Right? This is governance. This is politics. We can't get away from politics. Right? So just to take this, reductio ad absurdum, right? What if every Bitcoin user in the world decided, all right, we're going to change the hash algorithm. We're not going to use SHA-256. We're going to use MD5. Okay. And you may say, you smart. You got a monocle, so you're smart. Well, no. This is, I read Satoshi's white paper. I know that we are supposed to use this algorithm. But everybody else is like, what, SHA-256, that's old and busted. This whatever hash function, this is the new hotness. This is not going to be a very valuable blockchain for you, right? Even though you are following all the rules, you've done everything that you haven't changed anything whatsoever. But everybody else has sort of voted with their feet, right? They're following a fork of the chain that uses a different hashing algorithm. Well, this blockchain isn't going to be of much use to you. Right? You may as well just have a linked list. It's just you. Okay. So there are politics. We can't really avoid it. Okay. So one solution to this, one possible way to avoid situations like this, where it's I guess I have to decide on my own who I'm going to follow, what the rules will be here, is to add a way to vote on things into the system itself. Now, if you look at Bitcoin, there are ways to do this in sort of I would argue, a hacky way by signaling. Both miners and nodes can do this. And we actually saw this pretty famously in 2017. We'll discuss that in a little bit. But there isn't any part of Bitcoin where you can vote on the future of how it's going to work on chain. Okay? With Polkadot, we actually can. This is something called autonomous governance. The chain actually includes the ability to modify itself and modify its parameters. So let's look at some of the problems that we have seen with governance in the past. Like I said, I'll especially talk about Bitcoin Cash and Ethereum Classic, and see how Polkadot tries to solve these. All right, so what do we do if someone disagrees with some mechanism of the government? Okay. So this could be something as, when I say a mechanism of the government, what I mean could be just running the code, or like, how long blocks are taking to be produced, or some parameter, or that I don't like this particular implementation. Well, there are really three real options. And I took this from a book called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. So with it's kind of a kind of gives away the conclusion in the title of the book. But there are really three options if you don't agree with what your government is doing. All right. First is loyalty. Accept the decision. All right, well, you know what? They disagree. I disagree, but you know what? The majority wins, or I don't really care too much, so just sort of go along to get along. There's voice. We can try to change the system from the inside using the existing governance mechanisms. Or we can exit, leave the system entirely. So we can see this happening in the real world. So loyalty would be continue using blockchain even if it's suboptimal. And when I heard about this, I thought about the gladiators, right, in ancient Rome, and you're going and then Ave Kaiser. Sorry, my classical Latin's pretty rusty. Morature te salutant. We who are about to die salute you. They're about to die. Right? They know that they're going to be killed. This is probably not their first option if they think of all the lists of things they would like to be doing, but they're loyal, they're going along, they're doing it, or a soldier who may not agree with the particular strategy laid out by his commanding officer, but they follow it anyway. Okay, so there's loyalty. You can say, well, I disagree with it, but I'm going to go along with it. You can use your voice, right? Use existing mechanisms to try to institute change. Vote. Talk about what the problem is. Try to convince people around to your point of view. Okay, like this, this famous painting by Norman Rockwell, right? The freedom of speech, right? Try to explain to people why your decision is right. Or you can exit, right? So in blockchain, either use a different blockchain or fork the current blockchain. Right, so you have two competing versions of it, and here we have a picture of the famous first successful fork of the British Empire in 1776, when the United States split off from Great Britain. So these are the three different possibilities that we can do, and we probably want to avoid having exits as much as we can. Right? Loyalty is always a good thing, but people are going to have differences. We understand that. And whenever you do have some sort of exit, generally this is a suboptimal outcome. Right? When you have fewer people using a system, you're going to have much less power behind that system, right? In terms of security and in terms of usefulness, right? The utility of a network basically grows by the square of the number of users. So if we have two groups split off, well, if we think about this, if we divide by 2, we have reduced our overall utility. Remember that's covered by n squared pretty dramatically. So if that's what we want, if we want people to use their voice, we want to try to have them be loyal. We want to avoid exits. We don't want to have multiple competing claims or forks as much as possible. Let's look at some things that have happened in the past and what I would call failures of governance. So Bitcoin governance generally happens off-chain. There isn't much that you can do to directly influence the future of Bitcoin on-chain. You can talk with people, you can talk with developers. There is a process. I'm not trying to say that it's not a formal process. There is a process. You can submit a Bitcoin improvement proposal. You can signal that you believe in something or not, as a miner or a node runner. Hey, but decisions tend to be made slowly and conservatively. There was a good quote, I'm sorry, I can't remember who said this about how Bitcoin works, and it's very similar to how the IETF works. The Internet Engineering Task Force. They value rough consensus and running code, right? Let's make sure things are implemented, they're working, have a rough consensus. We don't have to have anonymity, but we also don't have a very formal process for this. And this worked somewhat well, but there were cracks sort of going through the Bitcoin community as part of the scaling debate through the early 2010s, really I'd say like 2012 up until 2017. There was really, and I'm dramatically oversimplifying this. One of these days, I'd really love to either write a book or read a book on this split and what happened in Bitcoin. Where basically there were the small blockers and the big blockers. And again, I'm really simplifying this political argument here. But basically, the small blockers thought that we should continue to have relatively small blocks on Bitcoin. That it should be difficult to be able to work on-chain. On-chain space is precious. Big blockers thought that we should have larger blocks, even though it would require bigger nodes to store all of this. But it would be easier for people to use the network, and more transactions could take place in a given amount of time. And again, I'm overly simplifying these arguments here. Even as I say it, I'm like, well, I want to say exceptions, but maybe we'll have a talk on that some other day. But again, just sort of generalizing here, small blockers tended to see Bitcoin as a store of value, like gold. It's not like people are going and exchanging gold every day to buy coffee, but gold is useful, right? It is a store of value. Versus a medium of exchange. The big blockers said, no, Bitcoin is peer-to-peer cash. We should be using it as much as we can. Small blockers wanted to do what's called a soft fork if they wanted to increase scaling. That is, make sure that previous transactions were still valid. Big blockers were more in favor of a hard fork to increase the size of blocks. So there were a lot of attempts to sort of improve Bitcoin and forks, or again, improve depending on which side of this debate you were on, including Bitcoin XT, Bitcoin Classic, SegWit 2x. But in the end, there was a lot of arguing off-chain, a lot of discussion, but they weren't able to come to an agreement. And eventually, Bitcoin Cash split off. They did not incorporate SegWit and increase the block size to 8 meg, eventually to 32 meg. And since block 478,558 back in August of 2017, they have been their own network. Okay? So I would say this is sort of a failure of governance. They couldn't come to an agreement, and the system bifurcated. There was a similar situation in Ethereum. So Ethereum, second largest blockchain by market cap right now. Ethereum had a very similar situation as Bitcoin in terms of governance. However, there is a big difference in Ethereum, is that they have I wouldn't call him he's not a president or CEO, but Vitalik Buterin has really been a sort of, even though he tries not to be, a benevolent guide or leader. Okay. And the Ethereum Foundation, which has been very involved in the direction of Ethereum. Compare this to Satoshi Nakamoto, who basically developed Bitcoin. We don't know who he or she is or they are. Was entirely anonymous and has not been involved in Bitcoin governance or Bitcoin decisions since 2011, I want to say. I could have the date wrong. So there isn't as much of a centralized force in Bitcoin. There is much more of a centralized decision making in Ethereum. Okay. So when Ethereum faced its first really big challenge, this is the failure of the DAO, they took a very different approach to it than what we saw with Bitcoin. So the DAO was a distributed autonomous organization that basically was going to be a virtual company running on the Ethereum network. However, due to something called a reentrancy bug, there were hackers who were able to basically get the ether that was stored in this smart contract. About 14% of all existing ether was taken, right, by this hacker. Okay. So again, those of you that are familiar with this, I'm kind of I'm glossing over some points. Again, I think this would be another cool thing to read a book about. But basically, 14% of all Ether was gone, including some of mine, actually. So I lost some Ether in this hack. So what to do about it? And once again, different parties, if you can think of them that way, sprung up. So there was sort of the common sense versus code is law groups. So I'd say common sense, and I felt bad saying this because I don't want to say that they were right. But their idea was, this is such a huge hit. We lost so much that it makes sense that we could do a hard fork and give that Ether back. Obviously, we didn't want to give this Ether to the hacker, and people aren't going to trust Ethereum if we have this massive these massive hacks and don't do anything about it. Whereas another group said, you know what, code is law. The code said that they could do this, right? They were smart enough to figure out how to do it, so they deserve it, right? So that was the code is law group. So I think another way to say this is, I should probably flip those around, like pragmatism, like, hey, this should, we just can't deal with this, versus principles, like, no, code is law. We tried to get away from, by having this sort of thing, a smart contract, program governance, we tried to get away from just people like Vitalik Buterin and the Ethereum Foundation just saying that, like, hey, here is this Ether really belongs to these other people. So there ended up being a hard fork. The Ethereum Classic people just kept Ethereum going without returning the Ether, and Ethereum, what we now call Ethereum, made that hard fork and has continued on. So again, I think this is sort of a failure of governance. We had no way of determining this and figuring this out on chain. What is the right thing to do? Okay? So it was sort of an ad hoc decision. People weren't prepared for it. It was, I remember there being, trying to figure out what was happening as an outsider was really difficult, because a lot of it was, people within the Ethereum Foundation, discussing this. Right? I couldn't just look on chain and see what was going to happen. All right. So again, there have been failures in governance that we have seen. Those are just two of the most famous ones. And so when we were designing Polkadot, we really wanted to try to have some way of building in governance, allowing decisions to be made in as fair a way as possible. So with Polkadot, governance is explicitly built in. All right? It's allowing the network to evolve in a very deterministic manner. Right now, you can follow, if you go to GitHub, github.com/Bitcoin, then you can look and see, all right, what sort of, what code might be coming in the future, but there's no way for you to vote on it, right? Unless you become, part of Bitcoin Core or convince people, again, off chain, that they should, add some different code or submit a pull request. We didn't want to have that be the process in Polkadot. We wanted to have a very well-defined way to upgrade the network, to make decisions, and improve the network. So what we have instituted is stakeholder voting. So this is very similar to shareholder voting. Just like when you own some shares in a company, right? If I've got 100 shares of a company and you've got 1,000 shares, and there's a decision, let's just say we're the only owners of the company, or at least the only ones that care to vote, and we're deciding whether or not to buy Foo Corporation. Well, we vote on it. I vote no with my 100 shares. You vote yes with your 1,000 shares. Well, you have more weight than me. You have 1,000 shares to vote. I just have 100. It's a very similar idea, except we're using something called dots. These are the tokens on the network that we can use for a variety of different things, not just voting. But basically, those who own more dots have more say in the network. Now, you may ask, well, why don't we just use pure democracy? Why does this person have more votes than I do? Simply because he owns more, or she owns more. Well, pure blockchain democracy is really vulnerable to what we call a Sybil attack. It's very simple for me to make as many accounts as I want and then vote with them. And if we wanted to remove anonymity, we could probably have a more pure blockchain democracy, right? If I say, okay, this person has this person A has this account, person B has this account, then we can have one-to-one voting. But again, that adds a lot of bureaucracy as well as takes away the ability to be anonymous. And so we really did not go that way. It also means that those who have more stake in the system by owning dots also have more weight in deciding what is the future of that system. So our goal here is that all changes to the network must be agreed upon by stake-weighted referendum. And the majority of the stake can always command the network. Right? We can always make decisions if we own the majority of the stake. All right, so we as a group, if we have 51% of the stake, we can eventually make the decisions and control the direction of the network. So we'll go through this in a little more detail very shortly. We'll actually do a lot of this stuff, but just to give an overall view, we have a council. We have motions that we can make and proposals, and people that the coin hodlers, if you will, can vote for these motions. All right. So again, just to give a very broad idea, if you own dots, you are allowed to vote. All right. So there's a little bit of extra stuff here that we'll go through, but that's the basic idea. Think of it as like you're a shareholder in the Polkadot network if you own dots. So the simplest form of democracy that we have here is a referendum. So this is going to allow you to vote on modifying the chain. A referendum contains a proposal. You need to say, I want to do something. And then people can either vote yes or no. All right, there's no well, I'd like to vote to give this person 0.4 dots. And no, I'd like to give them 0.9. No, I want to give them 0.3. Proposal is a yes or no binary option. And stake can vote either for or against it. So just some examples of what you can propose. You can modify the balance of your account. If you want to send a proposal that says, hey, I deserve 9 million dots. Well, you can send that out there, right? And see if people vote on it. You can register or deregister parachains, right? So these other blockchains that can interact with us, you can say, well, this one's been acting naughty. It's been sending us a lot of bad data. They're not living up to their end of the bargain. We can register or deregister them. We can modify blockchain parameters. They say that there are different penalties. We can modify the block generation time. We can add or remove members from the council, which is basically the governing leaders that represent the passive stakeholders. We'll discuss that in a bit. Claim dots, cancel other referenda. We can even, with our most powerful code call, modify the runtime code itself. We could say, I'm going to upgrade Polkadot. I'm actually going to self-modify the code of everyone that's associated with this. All right. And that's what we're going to do for the workshop. We're going to be Democrats, not like, we will take part in democracy, right? That you don't have to actually become a capital D Democrat, but we'll all be lowercase d Democrats, or at least shareholders here. And if you want to follow along with the actual instructions and not just look at the slides, I also have links at tinyurl.com/Mrs. Y2NAHQRG. So that's Yankee, the number 2, November, Alpha, Hotel, Quebec, Romeo, Golf. There we go. Still remember the NATO phonetic alphabet. Always happy. Yeah, Y2NAHQRG. You don't have to, you might just want to have that written down or link to it. Also, before we begin, please make sure you are attached to the Substrate Meetup network. So not the Code and Supply public network. And you can just use your phone or tablet. You don't need a computer. It's a pretty simple browser-based interface. All right. So in your browser, if you go to http://10.10.220.111:3001, and it should look like. Oh, come on. Oh, sorry, 220, not 230. There we go. It should look like this. So is anyone trying to access it, but they're having trouble? Yeah. 10.10.220.111:3001. Is anyone still trying to reach it?
Yeah, I'm getting it. It's back to the same URL, but I get one. Let's see. 10.10.221.11.3.0. Yeah. And I am on the substrate now. So.
Oh, okay. X out of that. Go to settings and take that from that. Prefer local node and save in the road.
You are connected. You're not connected.
Is this working for anyone? Says that it's not connected to anyone.
So you're getting the same thing I am.
You have to load, like,
What's that?
do custom endpoint in settings.
Oh, right. I forgot to go over it. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Sorry, I forgot one step there.
Oh.
Yeah. Click on settings. And set the remote custom endpoint. And then I have a, sorry, there's a typo on this screen. WS:// and then the same IP that you had before, 10.10.220.111:9944. Is this working for you?
Save and reload?
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought we had this working.
And I would go back to settings and go to Explorer to verify that I'm, because I'm looking at chain info right now. That's blocked.
So what do you see?
Yeah, I see something similar to what you.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, success.
All right.
Right now, it's working now.
Yeah. Cleveland. 9944. So we're gonna do it differently.
Yeah, the settings it doesn't tell you that it's working when it's working.
Oh, okay. All right. So just click on something else here, like that. So, sorry. Go back here. Yeah, try reload. You have too many S's. Just one S. And that's. I should use WSS, but this is exactly what I was talking about. Okay, there we go. All right. Anyone else having trouble with it?
Are you going to be showing it on the screen?
Yeah.
I don't want to use my phone.
Yeah, no worries. I'll show it on the screen. So, all right. So, you got it? You want to work on it or just? Okay. All right. Yeah, so what is this? I've actually got a very yeah, you can see some of the attempts to get on here. I had to mess with the network a little bit earlier, so thank you very much, Colin, to get things working here. So what I have here is a relay chain, so a very, very small and modified version of Polkadot running entirely on my system, as well as this Polkadot Explorer that lets us see, like, here is the blockchain that is being produced. Again, a very, very simple blockchain that is, it is generating blocks here. Only one process ever generates them, only one account. Alice Stash is going to be generating all of our blocks. But I have a blockchain running on my system, and I have this other Explorer that allows us to look into this. So the first thing that I would like you to do, let's go back to our all right, you're gonna have to make an account. So I know a few of you have been here for previous workshops, but this is an entirely new blockchain. I just started it up right before the talk. So you're gonna need to generate an account. So please click on Accounts, Add Account, keep all the defaults, just give yourself a new name and password, and click Save. It'll ask you if you want to save a JSON file for backup. You can if you want to. It's not really necessary because this is just a blockchain running on my local machine that I'm going to delete. But if you were doing this on a real system, you probably would want to save your data. So if you want to follow along, I'm going to click on Accounts, then Add Account. I'll call this I don't know, Bill Cool. Give myself a password. Right. You can keep everything else the default. This is your mnemonic seed, like how you would regenerate the account. This is what kind of crypto you're going to use. We actually support 2 different elliptic curves, but keeping it the default for now is perfectly fine. So, and just so you know, this name, that's really just, it's local to you. It doesn't really matter what you call it. So I'm going to save. Again, you can back up your account. It's going to save it as a JSON file that is encrypted with the password that you gave. All right. So now you should have an account here. So I can see Bill Cool at the bottom here. I have 0 dev dots, 0 available. I've done 0 transactions, and I have I'm using the default the Schnorkel curve for my crypto SR25519. Again, you can ignore that. The defaults are fine. All right. So the next thing is you are probably going to want to have some dev dots to do the things that we're doing. Right. Was everyone here able to create an account? That was here? All right. So if you send me an email with your address, not your seed, but your address, I'll send you over some dev dots. So if you look here, the easiest way to do that, you can see Bill Cool. It has a plus sign when I go over the address. So if you click, well, your address gets copied to the clipboard, and then send me an email. So Bill at Web3 Foundation, just give me dots, and just put your address here, and I'll send some over to you. So while we're waiting for that, I'm just going to send some over. Oh yeah, sorry, good call. So it's hard to see. Hold on. It's Bill at web3.foundation. Let me open. Where's my Emacs? Come on. All right, whatever. I'll put it here. That works. Kind of hacky, but it works. Did you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I just saw out of the corner of my eye. I thought.
Are you gonna put slides in the meetup? I gotta leave at 8. So
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll put some PDFs up. If you email me, I can just make sure to do that. Yep, and send you the link. Yeah, no problem. All right, so let's. All right, now this is stuck being really big. Oh well. Yeah, this is the way it always works with demos. All right, so let's see. We get some emails. I want to give away some dots. All right, so okay. How about 1,000? All right, and all right. So I think Colin, you should be seeing this soon. Robert, give me 1 second. Yes. All right, just to make sure Colin doesn't feel too rich, I'll give you 1,200, Robert. Yes. Just in case you're curious, this tip, it's similar to adding a transaction fee in Bitcoin. It basically is, hey, I want to sort of bribe the validators to take my transaction. You don't have to do it, but hey, why not? Especially because there is only one validator and I am the only one doing anything. But there's a tip. All right. All right. Is it Morale? Am I pronouncing it? All right. All right. So I'll send you over some dots. And how about we just sort of do it in the middle? Since one person got 1,000, another person 1,200, we'll give you 1,100. Oops. Why can't I? There we go. And no tip. And then I'll make my Bill Cool account. All right, I'll just give myself how about 950. I'm the lowest. All right, so hopefully was everyone able to see on their account? Like if they refresh the page, do they have some dots?
Yes.
All right, or dev dots at least. All right. Okay, so let's move on. We all have dots. We're all ready to go. All right, you should see something like this. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, we are going to submit a proposal. All right, so we are going to say, hey, I want something to happen. All right, and let's make it interesting. Let's say we want to make ourselves rich. Okay? We all want to do that, right? So we actually can do that. We have control over this. So let's go back here. This is go to democracy, right? And then submit proposal. Right? Go down to your account. So my Bill Cool account. And there's lots of different things you can propose here. So it's actually rather complex. There's lots of things I can do here, from set the code of the system. I can add commentary. I can add or register or deregister parachains. I can bond, force people to bond stuff for stake. I love that there is a chill command, which says, hey, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to validate or nominate. That's called chilling. But I'm going to go to pull this down to balances and set balance for Bill Cool for myself, and you all can do the same thing for yourselves. And I'm going to say that really I think I deserve 99,999 dots. So this is like basically I want to modify the chain in some way. Right? All right. So now there's value. So I can't just do this. I can't just spam the network and say, all right, hey, give me this, give me this, give me this, give me this. If I want to have people vote on this, I actually have to put something up myself. So for this system, I actually have it set to 10, but this is something that is modifiable. Oh, it's all the way in the back there. Just keep going back, and then it's the last door on the right. Yep. So basically what I'm going to do is bond these. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to, I can't use them for now. I'll get them back later, but these I'm not going to be able to use while voting is going on. All right, so it's 10 dev. So I'm now going to submit this, type in my password, and I now have a proposal. All right, so you can see democracy proposed ready. It's waiting to get on the blockchain. Blocks come about once every 10 seconds. I tried to make this pretty fast so that we could, get through it. This is obviously much longer on the real Polkadot and Kusama. All right, I see a couple other proposals. Everyone wants to be rich. All right, so if everyone does that, we can. I want to talk about this launch period. So basically, a proposal, gets wrapped up in a referendum at the end of. At the end of a launch period. So these periods, again, depending on the network, on the test net, it's every 100. I modified it to be 20 just so we don't have to wait quite so long. It's going to look at the end of every launch period, it's going to look at the proposals, and then whichever one has the most stake behind it that says, hey, yes, I want to vote on this, gets up for a vote. It becomes a referendum. Only one of these can become a referendum per launch period. Right? And the reason for this is, what if we had two referenda, that had conflicting things, that said different things? Well, what would happen if both of them got accepted? I mean, hopefully that wouldn't happen often, but it could. What you can do if you want to make sure that yours, gets in, I can say, all right, I want to. We'll see if this works. I want to second it. I want to put my stake behind it. So I'm Bob, and say that I want this to be voted on. So I can second the proposal. Right? Lots of people can second it. All right. So you can see. All right. Thank you, whoever seconded me. So we got a couple people. So hopefully, we should see this become a referendum now that this launch period is over. Yep. All right. So because that had the most stake behind it, I can see it got what's called tabled, which means it's put on the table and now people can vote on it. So now everyone here can vote on this referendum. Those of you that want to see Bill Cool get 999,999 dev dots, you can vote I approve. Or if you're like, no way, that doesn't belong to you, you can vote no, I do not approve. So if everyone, I'm going to approve. I want money. I've got the lowest amount of coins here. So now all of a sudden I'm getting greedy. All right, so now this got cut off a little bit, but this is. This is weird. And I've got until the end of the launch period. This worked fine. Somehow the screen, it's cutting off. It normally should say how many have voted. Right now it's just showing percentage. So if someone wants to vote against me, that'd be nice to see. You got 12 blocks remaining. You can also change your vote if you've already voted. Like if I say, you know what, I'm gonna be nice. So I hit vote, no, I do not approve. All right, 10 blocks remaining. All right, we'll let that go for a little bit while I continue here. All right. All right, so what did we do here? We asked to set the balance of the account to whatever, 99999. We bonded some dev, which we will get back, and asked to include it in the list of proposals. All right, so we've got our whole list of proposals here. Then the one with the most stake behind it, the most amount of stake seconded it. It basically won. It got to the front of the, think of it as a priority queue. It got to the front of the queue, and then became a referendum. And now, anyone here that has stake can vote on it. Right? Only one referendum is voted on at a time. So we can see there's just that one that we can vote on. And again, these referendum periods are much longer in the real world. I set them to 20 blocks, but generally we're looking at like a period of like 2 weeks. It's not going to be like, oh, if you missed it, well then, too bad. You weren't online that particular time. All right, 3 blocks remaining. The tension's so thick I can cut it with a knife. What will happen?
I would vote, but I let Safari assign the password, and I can't get back at it.
Oh, well, you can make another account.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm happy to send more over. They're not very expensive.
That's okay.
Yes.
That's okay. I kind of get them.
All right.
But Polkadot is much more than just this governance system, right?
Right. This is just one aspect of it. Like you can see, like a lot of the other stuff, we're not even going to have a chance to talk about.
The governance system itself. Can I change the nature of the proposals available? So, for example, today
Hold on 1 second, just because this is going to go away.
Sure.
So you'll notice the democracy did not pass. Right. Even though more people voted for it than against it. I'll talk about why. But I just want you to see that it did not pass. I did not get my 9,000 coins. And I'll talk about why in a moment. So sorry, I just want before that went away. I wanted.
No,
to
I get it.
Yeah. Okay, so sorry.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
So there are types of proposals: system, staking, pseudo, slots, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Can I? Are those? Do those encompass every possible action that I might propose to vote on?
Okay. So the question was, were the
we're confronted with a hard fork decision.
Yeah.
Would that fit within those kinds of proposals?
So yes and no, and I'll talk about why. Yeah, I need to give a little bit of background. So, if you want to vote, so the question was everything that we saw when we were generating a proposal, was that everything that you can do, right? Parachain, session, etc. So the answer, like I said, yes, these are all the things you can do, but one of these, right, is set code. So what set code allows us to do is actually modify the runtime code running behind this. Okay, which means we can add our own. So we can basically vote to add our own. Okay. So we can continue and actually vote on how we as a community are going to go forward. Right. So theoretically, someone can take all of this code and try to start their own fork, but it's going to be, because people are able to vote and because they are able to continue on this path without that, right? We have tried to make a way to have people express their opinion as much as possible, to try to increase the loyalty and reduce the risk of exit.
So you could even change the way, you could even vote on the way that you vote.
Yes, I can change.
In the real world, there's something called cumulative voting for directors, for example.
Yeah.
It's a special kind of rule. I can vote all of my shares for a given director and have other people pile in, so I can get a super majority to outplay the majority holders.
Mm-hmm. So the question was, I'm just repeating this so the stream gets it. So the question was, could we even modify the way we vote? And the answer is yes. If you're interested in more detail, I recommend looking at the substrate, which is the code this is based upon. So I'm just giving a very high-level overview here. The Polkadot runtime environment is basically a shell around what's called the runtime, the actual code of the blockchain. And anything that's inside that runtime is modifiable, which is the majority of what's in Polkadot. So if we determine that like the approval voting that we use actually is, well, this is bad, right? This up or down, we really need a trinary option or something. Yes, that's something that can be modified by, we need to stay within the parameters to get there, but we can basically modify any of that code, and we inject new code into it. So we got, think of like the JVM, right? The Java virtual machine. And I can just, put in more Java code, right? Different Java code. I can basically vote to add new runtime code that makes the system itself work differently. But I've got this sort of shell or foundation that allows me to do that.
Okay. So the change is what you're saying, you can change related to Polkadot code and not the substrate code, or is there a scope of change that is limited to?
Right, it's limited to the Polkadot runtime itself. Right, which is I always think of it as like a nut, right? Or there's like a shell, and then there's a runtime inside of it, and I can always pop in a new, things that are related to the runtime. I can't, pop in a new this shell, right? I could have people agree externally that we're going to have a new shell, right? A new Polkadot runtime environment. But we're really trying to minimize that. We're trying to make it so that anything that we would need to update is updatable on chain, not that we have to update the code, which is very different than something like Bitcoin or Monero or Ethereum, where if there's a new update, you have to get new software. Right? This would just, you would get the new code downloaded and keep running it, like hot swapping the code. All right. Okay, so you were probably a little bit surprised when you saw that even though more people had voted aye for the referendum, it did not pass. Okay. And there's also one thing I want you to notice here: referenda don't take effect immediately. This is usually if you do something before it actually takes effect, you have a few weeks. That way, the council can potentially override or call for a new vote or make sure that things are going wrong. You can see at the bottom it would say activate at block 60. So like the voting ended at block 40, that would not actually be modified until block 60. The second thing is this vote threshold requires supermajority approval. So again, this notices if we've got still proposals running. You can see supermajority approval. All right. So why do we need supermajority approval there? All right. So this is by default. First, we tend towards saying that generally changes are not something we want to encourage just for the sake of change, right? We really want to make sure that people really want to do something before it's actually implemented. So we have this sort of a bias towards not passing at first, okay? So this is something called adaptive-quorum biasing, all right? So there's a reason, but this sort of conflicts, right, with what we said, that we want the majority of the stake to always say what we're doing, right? We want 50% plus one of the network to be able to say that this is something that we want to do. We want to actually listen to what they say. But imagine somebody snuck through a referendum like, give me 99,000 new dots during August when most people are on vacation. They're not really caring about the network. They're just not paying attention. There's in general, most blockchains see very, very low voter participation. Those that do have on-chain governance, very low voter participation. So let's say, well, 90% voted aye, but only 0.1% of the stake voted. It's like, well, is this really what the majority want? Okay. So in Polkadot, the percentage of stake that you need to pass a referendum actually varies based on the amount of stake voting for it. So the fewer the number of people, or actually stake, that vote for a referendum, the higher percentage you need, right? We just assume if you're not voting on it, you're voting no, basically. I mean, it's not mathematically, it doesn't work out exactly that way, but basically the more people or stake that abstains, the harder it is to actually pass it. Okay. So we've actually got a graph here. All right, so we've got our you can just look at the standard. We'll talk about the inverted aspect of it later. So if we had a simple majority carries style vote, this would be the red dotted line. Just if more ayes than 50% plus 1 vote aye, it carries, otherwise it fails. But what we have is basically a curve that if only a few people vote for it, we really need a high percentage to agree. Okay? If a low percentage of people, or even if a majority vote for it, but a very small amount of stake votes against it, it's going to be it's going to be impossible for it to be carried. However, as we get closer to 100%, this gradually dips down. As more people vote, it becomes easier to pass a referendum. And again, the reason for this is that we don't want to have some small percentage of stake be able to vote something into effect just because there are people that generally are passive and aren't paying attention to this. Okay. So as I mentioned, we do have, generally we've seen this, a lot of passive people on the blockchain. I mean, I don't blame them. It sounds like I'm insulting them. People are busy. They don't want to have to vote every week. They don't want to spend their lives doing this. If they've got 5 dots or something that they have stored, they don't want to have to be voting all the time. So we actually also have the Polkadot Council, which is sort of the representative aspect of our democracy here. Okay? So dot holders can vote for council members, and those council members can actually have a little bit of power, and we'll talk about what they can and cannot do. They're not all powerful. Again, stake is still going to be able to override anything they do, given enough stake, but they do provide a way for passive members to vote someone in their place. Right? Council members are elected continuously, about 1 every 2 weeks. They get a stake weighted up or down on each one. So this is called approval voting, right? So I can look at a list, here are the people running for council. I can vote, all right, this one yes, this one no, this one no. I can vote as many, or just yes, 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 or no, 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 just very pessimistic. And the other interesting thing, if you're a runner-up, you get to keep your vote for forward voting. So the next time, because you were the runner-up last time, you get to keep some of those votes to make sure that even minority candidates could eventually get in.
And I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The function of the council is to act as proxy for.
So they act as the function of the council is to act as a sort of pseudo proxy. So I'll talk about their powers in a second. We can click on council. We can submit ourselves to be members of the council. So I'll talk about what exactly their powers are in a second. I just want to show how you could get on part of the council. And just so you know, there are some weird UI issues with this. We're getting ready to release a new version, and so we're not going to be able to actually add ourselves to the council here, but we can submit ourselves and vote, but we're not going to be able to actually join the council. So, apologies. You won't be the council on my computer here. So if you go to council, all right, and submit someone for candidacy. So I'm going to submit myself, Bill Cool. All right. Sign and submit. All right. Let's wait for this. All right. All right, yeah, we succeeded. Submit candidacy finalized. You can see Bill Cool and Alice have both listed themselves as candidates. You can see actually there's kind of an issue here where we've got 10 assigned seats out of 4. So there's a little bit of a problem. Like I said, I apologize. Found this bug today. So the all right, thank you, candidate. What's going to happen is the next time the term ends, people, it's going to look at who has voted for these candidates. Again, this is continuous. This isn't like Pennsylvania where you have to show up on whatever April 20th and vote then. I can vote now, for these different people. So candidate, I'm going to vote aye for you. And remember, it's basically aye or, it is an approval vote, so it's either aye or nothing, right? So aye or no vote. Either I approve of someone or I don't approve. I'm not even going to approve of myself. Right? I'm just going to vote for unknown candidate here. All right. Sorry, second unknown candidate. Yeah, here I think is where we might see the issue come into play. All right. So we voted, but like I said, there's a bug. They will never actually join the council. But what should happen is after this term duration, whoever has the most stake-weighted approval will take whoever's turn it was to be off the council. Again, that rotates and replace them. Right. So this way we have this, continuously changing council. Different people can be coming into it. Oops. All right. So what's the downside of voting? It's voting locks up your stake. So when you vote for somebody, you vote with all your stake. And you can see here, for example, Alice, she's got 999,000 or 999,000 dev, but she has 0 available because she's locked them all up in voting. So if you vote for someone, you're saying, well, I'm going to use all my stake for this. But just like with voting for a proposal where you had to bond your stake, I can't get that stake back until voting is done. So I'm sort of like, all right, I believe in this person enough to vote for them, enough to basically borrow my stake for a little while. All right, so why would you want to be on the council? What is the power of the council? This gets back to your question from earlier. Well, the council doesn't really have a direct way of overriding things, but what it can do is basically modify those curves, right, that we showed you on how easy it is for stake-weighted voting to actually pass referenda. So a public referendum, just by someone who is not on the council, what we did already, has what's called a positive turnout bias. That is, we're biased towards not passing, as we saw. The fewer people, the more they need to actually pass. However, if we have an unanimously backed council referendum, if everyone on the council agrees on a particular motion, on a particular proposal, then we have a negative turnout bias, which basically operates exactly as the inverse of what we did before, where the fewer people vote on it, the smaller it takes to actually pass. Because again, we're sort of this is our way. We give power to the council by basically being able to modify those curves, not by being able to directly. It's sort of separation of powers. They can't directly do these things, but they can make it more or less likely that they'll pass. Okay. And then finally, if the council doesn't agree on something, if this is some very contentious issue, it becomes simple majority carries. Right? So the traditional, what you think of when voting, 50% plus 1. Okay. So a council member can issue a motion. So just only a council member can do this. It's very similar to issuing a proposal. The only difference is it is a council motion, right? But it's the same idea as a proposal, and only council members can vote on it. Okay. So again, if it's entirely unanimous, we now have this negative bias, negative quorum bias here. So the fewer people vote, we assume that if everyone on the council agrees, they are our representatives. Well, in general, we'll sort of err on the side of passing. Okay. If people disagree on the council, we have simple majority carries. If it's just a member of the public, the non-council member, then we have that top curve there. But we can see as we get closer to everybody, all the stake participating and voting, 100%, they all tend towards just a simple majority carry. Right? If everyone votes, then it's just whoever wants to win, or whoever has the most stake behind them can win. So there's something so that's the power of the council, right? So it's a limited power, but you can imagine it would be very powerful in certain cases. There's one last thing that it is implemented in Substrate, but the UI does not support it, which is time-locked voting. So if you have a smaller amount of stake, like let's say you only have 10 dots, but you really believe in a proposal, you can actually lock up your stake for a longer period of time in order to give you pump up your vote, right? But the downside is it's like saying, hey, instead of voting for the next 5 proposals or referenda that come up, I'm going to lock up for that time and use all of my voting power for this, right? So, of course, the downside is you can't vote on those other referenda, and you have your stake locked up. You can't do anything else with it. In the meantime, you can't sell it. You can't use it to bond a parachain. You can't transfer it to anyone. It's locked up. But it's a way to give a little bit more power to your vote, even if you don't have that much stake. Right. So again, this is implemented. It is not currently supported. We can't actually interact with it via the UI, but I think it's a pretty interesting idea. I can imagine pluses and minuses to it, but I do think it's it's interesting. They're an experiment in time locking. All right, so that is the Polkadot governance in a nutshell. I apologize for the council bug that's not letting anyone get on council, so we can't actually do the motions there. But do we have any questions that I'm happy to answer? Yeah.
Here's a dumb one. Earlier, you mentioned on-chain and off-chain deliberations.
Yeah.
Or consensus or voting. Would this be an instance of on-chain voting? Is that what you have in mind? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so the question is this on-chain or off-chain voting? And this is entirely on-chain voting because I can see...
as opposed to a collateral medium of some kind.
Right. So off-chain voting would be like, well, there are a variety of ways to do this, right? We can just signal what we want and then just assume, to the developers. Somehow we can, message them, or Bitcoin has ways, like if you're a miner, you can actually indicate with by setting some bits in your block that you agree with something or not. It's not part of the network, but it's kind of something that's been hacked on. Talking with the developers, issuing a pull request, like saying, hey, I want you to add this code. Meeting with people, like hey, let's get all the Bitcoin miners together and let's have talk about what we want. Miners, users, developers, etc. All of that's off-chain. This is entirely on-chain. So difference is once this starts running. Let me go here. I can see what's happening and what's coming along, right? So even if I'm not, I can look at the proposal. I can see what is? All right, this is gonna be. I don't know. I'm just saying that one particular person is trying to. I want to say that one particular system is misbehaving, right? But everyone's going to be able to see that. It's not happening behind the scenes. Or like, hey, oh man, check that guy out. He's totally messing up. Like, no, someone can see. It's bad format for my bytes, but let's do something else. Balances is always the easy one because it's easy to understand, right? All right, so this I can see that this particular address is trying to what am I doing? Oh, because none of my stuff is free. Let me do that in the opposite order. Sorry. So, all right. I just locked up all my stake trying to vote someone into the council. so I don't have 10 dev to stake for this. So here now, like, let's wait for it to get on the block. All right, so now anyone can look, you can see this. You can say, hey, this address is trying to set their, to 9.9 megadev. I can vote on that. I can see how it's, how it's working. It's entirely transparent. Right, so the idea is, I can look at this, all of this on chain. I can see if somebody's trying to modify the code, and I can vote yay or nay on it. But the idea is that it should all be transparent and happen in a way that everyone can see what's happening and have a chance to, vote on it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Yeah.
This is a general question I want to ask. Since this actually interacts with multiple chains,
Mm-hmm.
on that, does this the nature of this governance or how these things work? Is it limited by the compliance that needs to work with other restrictions, if any at all? So, for example, if there is an outside if it is used for say financial purpose or something, let's say some other blockchain is interact with it. How do you make sure that it's not violating some other governance process that is established by some other blockchain that's interacting?
So that's a good question. So how can we make sure that our governance process and other governance processes don't interfere with each other of these particular chains with which we interact?
Not necessarily other blockchains, but let's say it is in your world or something, you're interacting with some kind of other financial matters in the real world.
Okay, so all right. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, how do we make sure that something that the process here is not conflicting with something else, completely automated?
Yeah, so the question is, what about us interacting with something like a financial system or a medical system that has its own governance process that's operating entirely off-chain? So really, I would say that's their problem, which it sounds kind of flippant. But what I mean by that is, they can say what their what their governance process is, and actually, we talked a little bit about this in the validator workshop, where we have a WebAssembly blob indicating what the rules are, and so operating for that chain. And so we have them say, like, all right, these are the rules by which you will operate when they become a parachain, when they first become a member. So they may have their own governance process, but they've already told us, like, here is how a valid block for us exists, right? This is the process that you're going to follow. And so those parachains, we can deregister them, if they're trying to do things that are bad for the network. That's one of the things we can vote on, is whether or not to register or deregister a parachain. But I mean, if it's violating a law or something like a meat space law, right? Something on the books, that's something that we don't really have control over, right? We can see what's on the blockchain. We can't see what's off the blockchain. We have certain ways of interacting with things that are off the blockchain, and those are through parachains, one way or the other, either directly through a parachain or via a bridge to some other blockchain, and then through an oracle or something like that. But we are dependent on, when they are a parachain, they give us basically a WebAssembly blob, like some code. Like, here are the rules that this chain will follow. It's not us to determine what, and how it's going to communicate with us. Like, here's how we determine what's valid and what's not. We have no way of knowing, like, looking through all the laws of the US and Switzerland and Finland and Sweden and Russia and Uzbekistan and Pakistan, you know what I mean? We just know, all right, here's the code that you say that you're going to operate by, that includes being, registered or deregistered with our network, and follow, how you communicate with us is handled through this governance. So we, but in terms of other laws or external data, we just have no way, right, of knowing what we might be violating, right? Same with, like, external data. This is the Oracle problem. It's very famous in the blockchain space. Like, how do we know that what data is coming in is good? All we can say is, well, it follows the rules of the WebAssembly blob that you said defines the state transitions of your blockchain. That is, did it generate a valid block on your blockchain? That's all we can do, right? That make sense? Any other questions? All right. Well, that is all that I have for you. Once again, oops, go all the way to the bottom here. My name is Bill Laboon. Bill at web3.foundation. Some of you already emailed me. If not, feel free to email me or follow me on Twitter at Bill Laboon. I'm happy to answer any other questions you have. Or right after this, I'll stick around for a little while if you want to talk. All right. Thank you very much.
Is there going to be another meetup like this?
Yes. Oh yeah. Good question. Yeah. So I plan on having a meetup in September. I'm not sure on the topic yet. We may talk about building a parachain. Maybe we'll talk about smart contracts. I don't know. If you have a particular thing that you're curious about, feel free to email me. I haven't made any decisions yet on what we'll cover next.
I have a talk that I'm reading currently. It's anonymity of a Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about how it differs anonymity.
Oh, yeah, good question. So anonymity on...
That's very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, so anonymity on the blockchain is very difficult. So the relay chain itself is not really meant to be anonymous in the way that a truly private chain is. But I already mentioned that one of the bridges that we're interacting with is with Zcash, which offers shielded transactions. Monero is a little bit more difficult, so I don't know when that would actually occur because for various reasons. So this is, even though the relay chain isn't really meant to be anonymous and doesn't have built-in support for anonymity, like true anonymity, we do plan to have interactions with networks that provide anonymity. And in fact, one of the projects that we provided a grant to is called Zero Chain, and they're making a Zcash-like parachain. So it is a parallel chain, runs directly with not through a bridge, but directly as a parallel chain that shares security, that offers a lot of the privacy protections of something like, as well as some interesting things like private assets. So you can actually create fungible tokens on this Zero Chain, and it is a parachain for Polkadot. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. So we're definitely looking at privacy. It's just not really a big focus for the relay chain itself.
I just started reading about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting since Bitcoin itself is it's entirely traceable, right? That's what a blockchain is meant for. But using things like like CoinJoin, and seeing some of these variations like shielded transactions on Zcash, or stealth addresses on Monero. How can in something that's entirely deterministic, how can we have anonymity and lose traceability? It's a very interesting challenge and problem. All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all.
I'm going to send you an email about some stuff I've been thinking about, but it's better in writing, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Feel free. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.